Do, 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 do. What's good, family? It's your boy Big L with another episode of the Pageturners Book Club, weekly political education podcast, broadcast, whatever we want to title it, where I pick a book and we walk through it page by page by page by page by page. Because here at the Page Turners, we believe in changing the current state of Black lives one page at a time. Um, so we are going to dig into this. We are currently reading Black Awakening in Capitalist America by Robert L. Allen, a absolute masterpiece, beautiful piece of uh, literature. I highly recommend it. The glare from the light, but there we go. Cop that. Let's make sure that we are working good with the mic. Yeah. Okay. I know StreamYard has been having some issues here lately, but I believe that everything is all right here. Again, currently reading Black Awakening in Capitalist America by Robert L. Allen. I try to come through maybe twice a week, but once a week, definitely, and hit you with some power, man. Great discussion, something for you to chew on, but it's imperative that if you are trying to hop on to this particular book, that you might want to look at the previous broadcast to kind of get an understanding of where we are. I don't do a whole bunch of summarizing the last episode because again, I'm only trying to give you 25 to 20 to 25 minutes of just great information, man. Something for you to digest. I know folks is busy and there's 101 things going on, but I believe that this particular book is incredibly important. So again, my name is Elgin Bailey, the Page Turners Book Club. We are reading Black Awakening in Capitalist America by Robert L. Allen. We are in picking up in chapter two. Actually, that should be section two, and we're gonna fix that right now because this is not chapter two. This is section two. Perfect. And man, you can find me on all of your social media platforms at Elgin Belly, Twitter, uh, Facebook, Instagram. Holla at me, man. So let's dig in. Again, we are reading section two, the social context of Black power. Uh, and let me make sure I check my time situations. Okay. To begin, the traditional Southern based nonviolent civil rights movement had largely ground to a halt and was in its deep throes. Innumerable demonstrations and marches in countless cities had drawn thousands upon thousands of Black people into hopeful activity. They let themselves be brutalized, beaten, jailed, killed, following the admonitions of moralizing leaders who told them to love your enemy and turn the other cheek. All of this suffering must surely culminate in freedom someday, the leaders said. Boy, I don't know if you picked up on that though, because that is the same thing that is taking place right now with Black Lives Matter. And let me read it again so you can see the correlation between the two movements. Uh, to begin, the traditional Southern based nonviolent civil rights movement had largely ground to a halt and was in its death throes. Innumerable demonstrations and marches in countless cities had drawn thousands upon thousands of Black people into hopeful activity. Currently, Black Lives Matter. What has it done? It's drawn tons and tons and thousands of people into hopeful activity. They let themselves be brutalized, beaten, jailed, and killed, following the admonitions of moralizing leaders who told them to love your enemy and turn the other cheek. All of this suffering must surely culminate in freedom someday, the leader said. So a lot of what you see, man, you see uh, these protests, these Black Lives Matter protests. And again, I'm not in any way denigrating or disparaging what these folks have been putting in and what they have been doing. But it is you notice the heavy emphasis on peaceful protests. Is every protest that we come up with has to have the title peaceful in it. And to a degree, that peaceful is almost asking for permission, getting the okay to do the protests. Okay, let's continue. By the summer of 1963, after years of intense struggle, many deaths, it seemed that some dramatic new step must be taken to bring the longed for freedom a little closer. We're in the same position. Grassroots leaders talked about marching on Washington and shutting that city down until blacks were granted full equality. We just had the March on Washington recently. We just had another March on Washington. We just had it a few weeks ago. Part of what is looked for is what? Equality. Same thing. The same fight that was taking place back in 63 is a very similar, almost the same fight that we're fighting 2020. But this militant sentiment was quickly co-opted by the the Kennedy administration and the liberal labor coalition in the Democratic Party, which has long claimed the black votes as its inalienable possession. Man, I tell you, reading this book, man, is just like my man, Mr. Allen, wrote this book today. It's just like literally he wrote this book today. I, I, I I keep rereading bits and pieces of the book because it's like, damn, this is the same thing over and over again. Listen, grassroots leaders talked about marching on Washington and shutting the city down until blacks were granted full equality. Again, we just had a march in Washington a couple weeks ago. But this militant sentiment was quickly co opted by the Kennedy administration and the liberal labor coalition in the Democratic Party. Here's the part, which has long claimed the black vote as its inalienable possession. The Democratic Party still feels the same way. The Democratic Party still feels the same way that our vote is guaranteed. And particularly in this era of Trump, it, let me continue, man. Thus, the March on Washington, which drew over 250,000 participants, became a summer picnic held in the honor of John Kennedy and his Civil Rights Bill, which blacks were led to believe was the answer to their prayers. But not all was sweetness and delight on that noteworthy day. There was dissent and grumbling in the ranks. John Lewis, that John Lewis, then chairman of SNCC, had written a militant speech not in keeping with the harmonious feelings scheduled to be put on public display in the Capitol. The speech was censored by March organizers. The uncensored version part in read in part. Oh, this is good. This is good. Because after John Lewis's transition here recently, we heard about him being censored at the march on Washington because he had such a militant speech that he was going to be given. That because the organizers did not want an aggressive military response, he was not allowed to speak, nor was James Baldwin. Okay? But here's part of the speech that we would have heard John Lewis' speech. In good conscience, we cannot support the administration's civil rights bill, for it is too little and too late. There's not one thing in the bill that will protect our people from police brutality. What is in the bill that will protect the homeless and starving people of the nation? What? What is there in this bill to ensure the equality of a maid who earns $5 a week in the home of a family whose income is $100,000 a year? Man, if this ain't the same damn thing that is taking place now, what? Man, I'm just, I'm blown. Because again, the same thing that we are seeing now is the same thing that we had going on in back in '63. Uh, Lewis was asking pertinent questions, but these were outside the sphere of the civil rights and therefore were not appropriate areas for federal intervention. The civil rights law that was eventually passed in 1964 required, at least on paper, the ending of racial discrimination in voting procedures, certain areas of public accommodation and public facilities, and some places of employment. It also provided for public school desegregation. Bruh, listen, man. I okay, I'm just gonna keep reading, man. I'm just gonna keep reading because I want people to see the correlation between what was happening back in 1963 and the correlation of what is taking place currently. To see that there is a correlation between the two. Okay? The catch in this and in the 1965 Voting Rights Act was in enforcement. Blacks who believed that their civil rights had been infringed upon were required to go through lengthy and elaborate procedures to secure redress. Even so, enforcement was slow, sporadic, and largely ineffective. Federal registers were sent in occasionally, some of the worst areas they were never reached. The net result of this procrastination was that Black people and their leaders were educated to the fact that legislation means nothing without effective enforcement. You get that? Legislation means nothing without effective enforcement. And enforcement, particularly when legislation flies in the face of social convention or establishment interests, depends on power. The federal government had the power and still has the power, but it needed the support of the Southern reactionaries who chaired major committees in the Senate and House. Hence, civil rights laws became merely more testimony to the truism that American democracy is subservient to the economic and political interests of those who hold power. One more time. Civil rights laws became merely more testimony to the truism that American democracy is subservient to the economic and political interests of those who hold power. So that's why I'm constantly harping on and pushing on that our focus should be on power, seeking power, building power, all those types of things, and not just simply trying to morally change the way white supremacy is by focusing so much on the content of their skin or the color of their skin narrative and begin to look at ways for us to actually build power. Okay, let me go ahead and continue. The experience of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party in 1964 provided more confirmation of this fact. Voter registration drives were a central concern of SNCC from 1961 to 1965. At that time, SNCC activists thought their voting strength could be used effectively to pressure the National Democratic Party, a party that claimed to be the friend of Black people. Isn't that fascinating? How even back in 1965, it was this narrative, it was this thought that the Democratic Party was the friend of black people, and we see what's going on. Thus, Nick decided that by creating a parallel political structure in the form of the MFDP, they could then challenge and defeat the racist Mississippi Democratic Party at the National Convention in Atlantic City. By pledging their unwavering loyalty to the national slates, which the regular delegation did not, the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party descendants believed that they could secure the ouster of the racist state delegation and thereby record a record for the democratic process. Now, man, listen, Mississippi is and probably and was and remains probably the most racist state within the Union. So, what the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party was trying to do here, they were fighting against the Mississippi Democratic Party to try to change and remove that party from being the party of power. So ultimately, black people would get some basic freedoms down in Mississippi. Okay? But the National Party, this is the Mississippi Democratic Party, the National Party seeking support in the South decided to employ the vicious weapon of racism once again and rebuff the challengers. This was another bitter but enlightening lesson for the Black movement. The civil rights movement failed not only because of these setbacks, but also because, here we go, pay attention. The civil rights movement failed not only because of these setbacks, but also because even the small victories it benefited from, they won and benefited mainly the Black middle class, not the bulk of the Black poor. Thus, Blacks who were qualified could get jobs. If there were no jobs in industry, there were frequently openings in anti-poverty programs for those with suitable credentials, degrees. After desegregation laws were passed, more affluent Blacks could dine at downtown restaurants or taking shows at previously segregated theaters, access. Those who had the money and the stomach for a fight could even buy homes in formerly all-white suburbs. In its heyday, the integrationist civil rights movement cast an aura which encompassed nearly the whole of the Black population, meaning that there was this overarching theme and overarching narrative and perspective that everybody was supporting and pushing for the civil rights movement. And it's very similar to what we see today. It's really not much different how people push the same narrative that everybody who is Black is pushing and supporting and going forth with the Black Lives Matter. We know that's just not true, and that's not a way to discourage or disparage what the Black Lives Matter movement has done. And but again, there's a number of questions that should be asked in regards to what the Black Lives Matter movement has done. And when I say the movement, I mean specifically the organization. Okay? There should be some questions, some checks and balances that should be taken care of. Okay. Here we go. Let me continue to read. Here we go. In its heyday, the integration of civil rights movement cast an aura which encompassed nearly the whole of the Black population. But the Black bourgeoisie was the primary beneficiary of that movement. The Black bourgeoisie was the primary beneficiary of the civil rights movement. Hence, in 1966, despite 11 years of intense civil rights activity and the new anti-poverty programs, the median income of a Black family was only 58% of the income of an average white family. And the Black unemployment still ran twice as high as white unemployment, despite the war-induced prosperity the country was enjoying. In some categories, man, peep this. In some categories, conditions were considerably worse. Unemployment among Black teenagers ran at 26%. In the Hall area of Cleveland, which experienced a rebellion in 1966 and again in 1968, Black unemployment in 1965 ran at 14%, only 2 percentage points below what it was in 1960. Another important indicator, the Black subemployment rate, which reflects part time work, discouraged workers, and low paid workers, was 33% in 1966 in the worst areas of major cities. The thing about this, man, the numbers here don't look that damn different than the numbers that we are experiencing right now. The numbers that we're experiencing right now. Matter of fact, take some time and look at the racial wealth gap. Look at the numbers and compare them to what is being shared here. Let me read it one more time, okay? In 1966, despite 11 years of intense civil rights activity and the new anti-poverty programs, the median income of a Black family was only 58% of the income of an average white family. 58% of the income of an average white family. Take a look at the racial wealth gap when you get some time and see if the what is mentioned here by Mr. Allen, the 58%, is any different today. See if it's any worse today. Because when we begin to measure progress, and we begin to see how far we've come, and we actually look, we cannot use access to places as the standard of our progress. We can't use the fact that we're able to use the same water fountains, restaurants, all those things as the standard of measure. We can't even use certain laws as the standard of measure. You have to look at the whole of a thing to determine whether a thing is progress or not. If a car is going uphill trying to get to a destination with you in it and you're running late to get to where you get to, if you show up in your car on time to a particular place, you're still late because you're still sitting in your car. You may have made a perceived progress and got to your destination, but you have not gotten inside to where you actually are going to get paid from the progress that you've made. And I think that's important because we have this romanticized notion, man, of the civil rights movement. We hold this vision of the civil rights movement that I think it should be looked at a little more critically and who benefited from more than anything else. And you'll begin to see that poor Black working class folks did not benefit from the civil rights movement in the manner that the Black middle class and white liberals benefited. But anyway, I wanted to give you a quick 20, man. Give you 20, and I'm gone. This is your boy Big L, man, for another episode of the Pageturners Book Club, reading Black Awakening in a Capitalist America by the great Robert L. Allen. Cop the book, cop the book, cop the book. Till next time, I'm out.